Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is a very exciting time where we are opening the Jornadas Regen, which are the Regen Days, a dialogue about regeneration. And we think now is the time to get started with this movement that's growing and have a debate about something that's very necessary. And it's a different way of looking at everything. But has a lot of answers that we're looking for. So I'm Sharam Yalda and founder of Human Nation, and I'm a consultant in strategic innovation for funding of innovation projects, and also putting together a founder of the advisory for transition of companies to a regenerative culture. So I'm an economist and an ecologist, so those two don't seem to be compatible, or for many years it seemed like there were a paradox being an economist and an ecologist at the same time. But I feel that with this regenerative world and the triple balance world, maybe finally the economist and ecologist can become one role integrated. And I'd like to thank SAT Arquitectura and Distrito Natural, Triple Co-working, where we are today, for inviting us here and making this possible. Distrito Natural is the promoters of impact investing for a new housing model based on this regenerative approach, which is about communities coming together to live in a different way. And Triple Co-working, which is this very healthy space, we are healthy building, also designed by SAT Arquitectura, is a space where people come together to work together in a very different way based on this concept of triple balance. But we like to think also, apart from the balance, there's a purpose also, because you also have the basement. I noticed that you have a bunker for going and reflecting and meditating on the purpose. So we have the profits, the planet, and the people floors here, and also the purpose. So the people here physically sitting with us and all the people online, and we have the experts, the regenerative practitioners, Bill Reed from Regenesis Group, Daniel Christian Wall from Designing Regenerative Cultures, Emmanuel Powells from Green Living Projects, and Liliana Dominguez from Amarna Vida. We also have the online, which you can watch on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. And also we have simultaneous translation in Spanish. So what you can do is go to the link on the actual being posted on the site on YouTube. If you go to the description of the channel in YouTube, you'll be able to see the link to watch simultaneous translation in Spanish. So the objective of these conferences is to have some dialogues to understand what is regenerative culture actually about and how it applies to housing models. And when we talk about housing, we're looking at living communities where people live, where they work, where they interact, where they relate. So sometimes the concept of housing, we think about just one house where one person is living or an office, but this is a very different way of looking at housing, no? So we'd like to also thank all the companies that supported and the people that have supported this project, but specifically FINSA, NAUF, FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council, TREBE, O11H, and GeoPanel. These companies are leading this new paradigm towards sustainability, and all the collaborators that are making this event possible, and Elena that will be translating, all the people, the technical people here, and all the people that make it possible. So we're now going to the first presentation, where I will share my screen. Okay. Okay, so just a little bit about this project that we started doing last year, exactly in COVID times, where we were reflecting and a lot of things came together. So it's about strategic transformation of consciousness for regenerative business design. So it's about having a different way to do business, and a disruptive innovation advisory, because we believe that we have to make disruptive decisions because we don't have a lot of time. So this image, of course, many people say 50 years ago, it changed our relationship with the planet. It was part of this big movement. 50 years ago, the Club of Rome issued their report. The UN backed it, and it's taken us 50 years to realize that this planet has limits, and the society also needs to be nurtured in a different way so that it's more equitable, because we've reached all the limits. So perhaps we're at the beginning of this global ecological age, since this photo was taken from the Apollo, from the moon. And one of the things that we looked at is the work of Presencing Institute the last 15 years by the MIT, where they identified that we have three major divides that's breaking our system, from a systemic point of view. We have the ecological divide, which is the divide between ourselves and nature. We have the social divide, the self and the other, so how we relate to each other, and the spiritual divide, which they define not in a religious way, but in a division between ourselves and ourselves. How well do we know ourselves? And how well do we aim to our highest potential of who we could be as human beings? So the idea is tackling the root causes of the problem. So everything we see, like climate change, like social inequity, and all the illnesses, like a lot of psychological illness, spiritual illness, that we see today, loneliness, is symptoms of a system. And there are structures that are maintaining that these symptoms continue. So many times, because of our mechanistic mindset, we try to attack the symptoms. When we go to a doctor, we take medicine, whatever. We don't think about the root causes. But many times the structures are actually what maintains those problems. And it's the thoughts that many times maintain the structure. So if we don't change our thoughts, many times the structures just stay there, because until we change our mindset, we don't change structures. So as Presencing Institute identified with this concept of the U theory, if we don't go to the source of the pain points and really connect, and instead of only thinking, to feel what's actually happening, to connect with nature, to connect with each other, and to connect with ourselves, then perhaps we will do the transformation in an authentic sense and not try to just tackle them from the same mindset. So this is the donut economics model. We know that we are breaching a lot of the planetary limits, like climate change. So these are symptoms of the current system. And social equity is the biggest symptom on the social side. So we have the ecological crisis and we have the social crisis. The global inequality has been rising on an astronomical scale. And since the financial crisis of 2008, the number of people at the very top of the pyramid has just increased. And we have an extreme concentration of wealth in the hands of the so-called 1% or the 5 zillionaires. But also the gap between the wealthiest and the poorest has been increasing. And since COVID, the latest Oxfam report is that has got even worse, even got accelerated further. So the wealthy got wealthier, and you can see the report. The link is here. We'll share the presentation. But the idea is that many businesses today that are causing a lot of these externalities and the wealth inequality are thinking from this mindset of business as usual, extractive mindset. They moved into design thinking to think about the user. So the customer is king, everything is the customer. Now the idea is that we need to go to these social cultural economies and think about the planet and consider that in our design thinking. So that this is the work by Impossible, where they identified that where we need to be is to be planet-centered and humane-centered, not human-centered like we are above, but also we are part of the planet. So we see the new economy as this rise of this new humanity, perhaps a regenerative culture, where humane values based on deep purpose can drive ecological design and make science and technology serve us, make artificial intelligence serve us as a tool and not to control us and to be the one that actually dictates how we live. So we want ecological design. And we think that this is an alternative to what we see unleashing, which is a kind of a capitalism that's controlled, what they call sometimes feudal capitalism, which is very, very few people are actually, through monopolies and oligopolies like these big companies, are able to basically use the technology, make the decisions, influence policy, and where we see democracy is being threatened. So we think that to achieve this triple balance, we actually need to base it on this deep purpose. And we believe that regenerative culture is a place where we can come together and develop this deeper purpose to create this balance. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but we have different labs that we're developing to explore these ideas. And so far, we're getting very good results. We're developing an ecosystem for regenerative enterprises where everything is based on this new common story that we're trying to build. We're trying to influence policy also with the new European Bauhaus, because we think that the new Bauhaus shouldn't be about aesthetics. It should be about a real transformation of society and culture based on these regenerative values. And we think that SDGs can be defined by default, because the regenerative culture can help us actually reach the SDGs by default and by design, not to try and reach the SDGs by just tweaking an existing system that's already broken. So I'll just briefly present. This is a project that we won with the European Commission last year, and we've started it, and we're applying these same methodologies with Instituto European of Design, Texfor, the Confederation of Textile, Finova, Circulab, the Circular Project, and ourselves, where we're trying to apply these principles into a business ecosystem, an innovation ecosystem for regenerative design in fashion and textile. So we are putting this into practice. So I'm not going to go into this detail now. What I would like to now just do, we can take off the presentation if you like. We can now ask the speakers to present themselves. So I wanted to ask, based on this reflection, COVID made us reflect with this quote that if we have not linked ourselves to true emptiness, we will never understand the art of peace. And a lot of businesses, corporations, the directors always have the art of war, the Shansu, this book as a guide, a competitive war strategy as a way of doing business. A lot of philosophy of corporations comes from competition, whereas the regenerative culture, it's all about collaboration. So I would like to ask Bill Reed to present himself and tell us how he's managed to foment collaboration in many of his excellent projects, where he's brought a lot of people together to transform entire neighborhoods and watersheds. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Let me share screens here. Hopefully this will work. And okay, I'm going to share the whole screen. There we go. Can you see that? I'm not going to put it on presentation mode. But is that visible, everybody? Can you hear me? Hello?
You hear us?
Sure. Am I able to, are you hearing me, Sharon?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. And I think I'd like to address what Otto Scharmer of the Presencing Institute talks about in terms of the three divides. I think there's actually even a deeper, more root consideration that actually links all those divides. And let me share a paradigm of Carol Sanford that she calls the four modern paradigms. And that is, the first one is extract value. I think we understand, we pretty well know what that's about. sorry for the dog. We're extracting minerals from the earth. We extract nutrients from the soil. We extract spirit from our staff in companies. And there's a reciprocal part of that too. There's exchange value that is beneficial. If we can actually put back what we extract, there's some benefit to that or some more positive aspect to that. But extract value generally has been how we're degrading the earth. We move to the next level, and that's arrest disorder. And arrest disorder is where pretty much a lot of the sustainability movement has been working over the last 30, 40 years. Slowing down the damage, making it more efficient. We've heard the expression, sustainability is a slower way to die. So then we need to actually move to another dimension, and that is do good. And do good sounds pretty good, except when it isn't. And when it isn't is when we impose our idea of good on others and other places. And that's, if you will, colonialism can be perceived as an idea of doing good, where we think that our ideas are the best and we impose them on someone else. So the do good has a definite shadow side. So the antidote to that, from our perspective, is evolving capability. I'm hearing an echo, so I'm going to try putting headphones on.
So evolve innate capability can be defined like this: whether with people or life sheds, every living entity asks that we approach it individually to reveal and support its unique potential. Before I go on, I'm wondering if people could put their microphones on mute, because I'm getting a lot of echoing. So whether with people or life sheds, every living entity asks that we approach it individually to reveal and support its unique potential. So what does that mean? We'll unpack that in a minute. Regenerative development seeks, and these projects seek to develop the inherent potential, or this innate capability, in everyone and every living system they touch. Regenerative design emerges from this understanding. So let's talk about inherent potential or innate capability. This little boy is likely going to be an airplane pilot. If I force that young child into a different profession because I think he should be there, that's going to put him on a psychologist's couch for probably the rest of his life. So we want to work with that potential of our children. And our places are equally this way. Sebastião Salgado's family farm in Brazil, after he got done taking all his war photography in Rwanda, etc., he retired to his family's farm, which had been desertified. But this is what the farm looks like 15 years later. We know that the system can recover its potential if we work with it, not against it. Of course, during COVID, Beijing's air got much cleaner because we actually weren't working against it. This stream in Baltimore, Maryland, that a civil engineer had to make out of concrete to avoid total suspended solids. 3 years later, once we managed rainwater properly, it looks like this. So nature can recover. And every city on the planet, whether it's Barcelona or Pittsburgh or Seattle or Park City, Utah, is unique. They are unique living organisms. How do we understand the essence or the innate capability or potential of those places? So when we work on projects, we are not working in terms of the project itself, which is a transactional relationship where most developers will go to a community and say, we'll give you a swimming pool or a community center if you give us permission to build the project that we want to build. Instead, we're looking at how do we actually all support the potential of the system, the city and region. And so every participant and stakeholder, including the developer, become an equal stakeholder in the service of this larger system, which, by the way, developers want to do anyway because they want to make sure the system is healthy. That encourages their projects to have value. And out of this relationship comes a project that is meaningful to the community. When we work with communities, we tell the developers, all the developer deserves is to make a profit for their risk, but they don't deserve to tell you what to do. So this is a new relational relationship for the purpose of serving the larger system. And by the way, this is how we get massive transformation, is we don't work at project by project. We're working with enrolling everybody in the service, or anybody who really wants to, in the service of this larger system. And Elinor Ostrom proved that in her Nobel laureate work on the common pool resource, where she says, when we work in places, it negates the tragedy of the commons. Place by place, we actually can understand and get feedback from that system so that we respond to it. So I maintain that we can't save the planet, it's too large, but we can save the planet place by place. I could give an example about this, Sharam, but how much time do I have? Do I have enough, 3 or 4 minutes? I'm unclear when I started. All right, well, I'm going to, in the absence of a response, I'm just going to keep going until you give me the hook. This might be a screenshot for you to take, though, to consider what I just spoke about, since we can't go into detail. So take a screenshot if you can, and ask yourself these 2 questions to consider the nature of these 4 paradigms. Use personal examples with a child, a partner, a colleague, or an acquaintance. And then how, once you actually get that experience, think into what the results of your work might be, what your work might look like at each of those paradigms with clients or communities. No, I'm going to actually not do a case study since I only have 2 minutes. So I'm going to cut off early, and we can talk about this during the question and answer period. So let me just reinforce that evolving innate capability, or evolving the inherent potential of every living entity, I'm going to go back to this definition, is key for a regenerative relationship. That will actually address the social, the ecological, and the spiritual divide, because this is a way of becoming conscious of each of the value of every living entity on the planet. That's the bridge, in our estimation, to reach a regenerative culture. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with that. Thank you, Sharam.
Thank you very much, Bill. So Daniel, if you can do a presentation. Daniel Christian Val from Designing Regenerative Cultures. Hello.
Hi. Wonderful to follow on Bill's presentation. Always a pleasure to listen to him and speak with him. And I think it's really important at this point because here in Spain right now, it seems like regeneration is going to the roof, and hordes of consultants are filing their archives on circular and sustainable and lean and smart and whatever they were selling as the new, and are now jumping on selling regenerative or regeneration. And what, on the one hand, wonderful, it's the beginning of a conversation, but let's not forget deepening that conversation. And what Bill presented is a pathway to deepening it. And really hold, on the one hand, I think it's important not to dismiss sustainability nor dismiss the SDGs. They are a bridge that we can use to reach a regenerative impact. They are a platform of conversation. But on the other hand, it would be just as disastrous to just change the labels and continue business as usual. And for me, what I've noticed working with some companies, as long as we ask the question, what can regenerative do for tourism, for business, for my company? We're actually not really looking at developing the capability that Bill was speaking to. If we truly want to be of systemic healing impact, then what we should ask is, what can my company, my team, our community do to align with life's regenerative impulse? And another mentor of mine, Fritjof Capra, who wrote the book, The Systems View of Life, agreed with me in a conversation a couple of years ago that ultimately you could easily say that life is a nested regenerative community. and just like Bill so importantly pointed out, the minute we try to solve the world's big problems on a planetary scale, and we actually focus also piecemeal problem by problem by problem, rather than looking at potential, it does two things. On the one hand, by solving abstract global problems, we push them even further into abstraction, and it actually pushes us then into formulating them as problems. But the minute we home in on the community of life that we are actively participating in place, whether it's our team, our business, our community, our local bioregion, then we begin to not just label things, but to actually see the specificity of each individual player, each individual contribution that can be made in collectively healing the system. And so if at the heart of regeneration is this notion of aligning with life's evolutionary impulse, of aligning with the process by which life over 3.8 billion years, as Janine Benyus has so beautifully put it in her work with biomimicry, creates conditions conducive to life. So how do we create cultures, and this importantly plural, let's please not constantly use the word regenerative culture in a singular, because that would be another kind of colonialism. It would be saying, here's one culture that everybody now has to adopt. No, just as much it has to be place sourced. So it will come out of the biocultural uniqueness of each place and each bioregion. And ultimately what it does, and this is also really important to remember, is we're not talking about the latest buzz and the newest invention here. We're actually talking about coming home to a pattern that enabled our evolution. Our species, for most of our history as beings, has been bioregional and regenerative in the bioregions we inhabit. Even more than that, all our indigenous ancestors around the planet in the past, and also indigenous cultures still alive and thriving today, basically agree on one important reframe, which is land does not belong to us, we belong to the land. It's easy to understand. The land will be there long before all of us that are listening right now will have disappeared. And if we build structures that still believe that we can keep encircling the commons and not sharing this pattern of life generating abundance, it's a shift from competitive scarcity to collaborative abundance. And part of that shift is understanding oneself in that nested wholeness that life sustains. And so this ecological and spiritual divide that Sharam brought up at the beginning is one and the same divide. Like self and nature, that's actually reinforcing the paradigm that culture and nature are separate. The real way to connect ourselves to ourselves is to understand that all life lives in that dynamic polarity between being for oneself and being as part of a larger whole. And we actually, as beings, we are individuals and we are the planet. We are an expression of this living planet. And so we need to realign to this, and the frameworks and practices that Regenesis Group and Cara Sanford have developed is one way of deeply diving into this. Other options or other contributing pathways are simply to also pay more attention to the questions, and particularly with focus of place and on place and local culture. And in my book, Designing Regenerative Cultures, I suggest that if we put the questions in the forefront and we actually live the questions in place together, we can begin to reconnect to our potential as healing agencies in our business, in our community, in our bioregion, and ultimately also on the planetary scale. And part of that also means, in this context of what would the built environment look like in a regenerative culture, let's not focus too much on the products or the buildings. Yes, we need to focus on them as well. But truly being regenerative is also about understanding that these are just steps along an evolutionary pathway. And therefore, building capacity is more important, because what ultimately counts is the journey. And part of the mistaken framing of how we worked on sustainability is to present sustainability as this destination that one day we will arrive and then we down tools and live happily ever after. But in the notion of regeneration, we're actually shifting towards a new practice, a new way of being, not just doing regeneration. And to actually put...
Well, just a minute to go, please. Can you hear me? Yep.
Yeah, put the pilgrimage and the apprenticeship that we can do individually and collectively at the forefront. And this is extremely practical. This can be done with companies. This can be done in communities. And it's ultimately a process of re-inhabitation, of coming back home to place and coming back home to life. And to understand that the one way that we can express our individuality, our unique essence and potential is in service to the larger whole, our community, our bioregion, and the planet. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Liliana Dominguez from Amana Vida. Hello, Liliana.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Sharon. And good afternoon to everyone that are seeing now us today. And I'm sorry for the beginning. I was not able to. Maybe it was the excitement of being a part of this panel, which I appreciate so much. And once again, I'm grateful for the organization. So I'm so sorry for not being here in the beginning. I just wanted to share a little bit about, I put the conversation a little bit in more personal level. I would like to do it in a little bit different way for what our honorable speakers, Daniel and Bill, which I have the privilege also to know, talk a little bit about regeneration. I would like to do a little bit of talking about myself, talking about my own process and how I came across with all this, and talking about this connection between self and the well-being and health of the self, with also the ecosystem, so, and the planet as a whole. So since I was a little girl, I always loved nature. It was my biggest passion. And I always had this dream of one day I would like to build a place where people and nature would live in harmony. That's why I became an environmental engineer and a big environmental activist during my teenage times. And somehow in one point of my life, I had a very traumatic event in my life. And it was through nature that I began at that time, saved me in a way, because I started in a way to regenerate myself through nature. So it was a very important part of me and the role that nature had at the time. I began my career, I think Sharon mentioned, I'm an environmental engineer, as I pointed out, and I worked several years in contract jobs and as a renewable energy project manager. But at the time, one day, I felt that I was not living and not fulfilling my purpose at all, the dream that I had when I was a child. So I began this quest, what was my purpose, and I was not living in alignment with it. So I left everything in my life back in the moment, and I went to India. And it was in that place that I stayed there for a while, some months, that I started my journey of personal self-discovery and reconnection, and what I call self-regeneration. And it's a little bit about this that I'm going to talk about here. And it was at that point, even though that I study environmental engineers, so I knew a lot about the biological systems and ecological systems. It was really when I was in India and the process that I went through that I really analyzed that everything was interconnected. I came across knowing a little bit more of the traditions of India, namely the health process, the Ayurveda process, which is a traditional Indian medicine. And I looked that they understood that everything was interconnected. And it was a thing that I thought that at least us in the Western world were not so much connected with this concept of really everything being interconnected and everything working as a whole life system. And that for me, what was the big aha moment for me. And I decided that at that point, I would promise myself that I would contribute in some way, shape, or form to this concept of wholeness and the connection between everything. So with that dream that I had in mind when I was a child, I came across with designing this project, which is called Amarna Vida, and which the purpose right now, it's a very recent project, sorry. And actually the purpose of it is being a catalyst for the healing, transformation, and regeneration of individuals, organizations, and communities. And these three words that are here on our purpose, which is healing, transformation, and regeneration, they are really very meaningful, because for us, at least, they are pretty much very interconnected. It's a little bit about what I came across here to talk a little bit more. So Amarna Vida, basically, right now it has 3 areas. I don't want to go through a lot. One particular area that we are developing is a project that actually has the essence by itself to heal the person, so that also the ecosystems can be healed and the connection between it. So yeah, can you hear me?
Just one more minute, please, Liliana.
Okay,
if you can.
so right now, also another project that I'm involved in, and I know Shanam through it, is Argo. It's also related with creating like a collaborative platform regarding regeneration. And that's basically what also I know Shanam. And the big issue that I bring here is there is no ecosystems regeneration without people regeneration. That's the biggest point that I think it's important to point it out too. So, and I just 1 minute, I just leave this slide to really think the connection between people's regeneration and ecosystems regeneration. They are pretty much interconnected. And we have the spirit, the mind, and the body, which is the individual regeneration, and the ecosystems. We have to go to the essence of the place, which is the thing that Bill pointed out a lot. A part of natural flows and dynamics and the physical elements. And there's a connection between both. And actually, for me also, there's a connection between the process of self-regeneration of the people in the regeneration and the ecosystems regeneration. But we can discuss a little bit further in this discussion, since I don't have much more time, but I leave it here because I think it's a very good point for discussion on all this presentation. And thank you once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Liliana. Emmanuel Paus from Green Living Projects present himself.
Hi, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here, especially in the presence of Bill and Daniel, who have been an inspiration for me for at least a decade. Myself, I worked as a green building consultant. So I started out 15 years ago doing LEED certification, which we are now doing with our company and with our consultancy. And but my background is economics, just like Sharam. And that the advantage was that I came into this real estate business with a beginner's eye. So it allowed me to observe in a different way. And but over time, just as Bill said, started to realize that sustainability was just a slower way to die. And I was looking for something different and found it eventually in regenerative development, and I decided to become a regenerative practitioner, to be engaged in projects that want to work with purpose, that really want to be regenerative. And I'd like to build a little bit on what Daniel said about the words that we use. I think one of our problems that we have is that we talk a lot and we don't know anymore what we are talking about. Just the word sustainability in project meetings, either you forbid the use of the word because it has lost all meaning, or we try to really talk about what we mean. For instance, if we talk about sustainable transport, what does sustainable transport mean? It's definitely not electric cars if you go into what making an electrical car involves. But if we talk, for instance, about human-powered transport, that's something which is more understandable. We know, again, what we are talking about. So I think that's very important. And as Daniel pointed out, the word regeneration is popping up everywhere, and it's being used, misused, and it's very important to keep being aware what it really means. And being an economist, to put it a bit in an economic framework, we talk a lot about wealth in the economy. But if one really starts to investigate where the word wealth comes from, it comes from health. Now, when we talk today about health, we associate that a lot with financial wealth. But if we think a little bit deeper about health, and then we should think about health in natural systems, health in people, and that's one of the big changes in economy, where our thinking should be, how can we create health in natural systems, in human systems, in social systems, and how can the built environment, how can a building and money be a catalyst to create that health? And if that is done properly, there will be a flow and exchange, and also that built infrastructure will be worth more, will be more valuable, and there will be a financial return as a consequence of really working with purpose, trying to restore health in natural and human systems. And that optimization is what nature does. And in essence, if we want to work regenerative, it's about working from a mindset that observes how nature does things and then try to apply that. And that takes some work, some observation, but it is my experience over the last couple of years that once you start really understanding how nature works, the things that we do as humans make a lot more sense. And so I'd love to, in the dialogue later, discuss these topics a little bit more.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So we can move to the dialogue now. So we all get a chance to speak more, and I think we talked a lot about this. Also came up about the global, the top down, and the local. We talked about this difference between the mechanistic kind of view, where a lot of it is in the mind, and also what was said about this kind of more holistic view and a deeper connection. So a lot of what we're talking about is connecting and about relationships, one way or another. Whereas in the last 200 years, it looks like we've gone down this mechanistic route, of separating everything and breaking it down into bits, which is given us a lot of technology and science advancement, but it looks like, as it was said, it's left a whole array of things behind. So the question really is, don't know, maybe Bill, you have a lot of practical examples of how do you actually get these people to come together and connect and make these deep relationships to be able to transform at the very local level, models where this can be, and how would we be able to replicate this, and how would we be able to scale something like this in a world that it's so fragmented and everybody's just going in this mechanistic way. So it's attractive, and we can invite everybody in, so it's inclusive, so they can learn and replicate fast, because we have like 10 years according to UN to do this. So let's get on with it.
Sure. I'll try to, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And great to be here with all of you too. I should have acknowledged that, Daniel, Emmanuel, Viviana. So I'd like to talk about the idea of potential as well as the idea of field building. And so what the technique that we use is we try to help people stop focusing on the multitudes of problems that exist, because there are thousands of problems. And when the tendency is when one focuses on one or two problems that happen to be what energize me or someone else in the community, then there's an argument about which problems to work on. And if you actually solve in quotation marks, there are 3 or 4 other problems, unanticipated problems that actually appear. So we keep stirring ourselves into a froth by trying to solve problems. And let's even take climate change as an example. Can you solve climate change? Let's say that we do solve climate change. Have we actually addressed the issues that are facing the planet that still will put us in a destructive spiral? And of course we haven't. There is so much else going on. So how do we work on the whole? And the idea of working in place allows us to hold a whole with some level of comprehension. And what we do is we explore the potential of a place to be healthy for human to human relationships and human to nature relationships and nature to nature relationships, and help people paint a picture of reality in that place, not borrowing ideas from Barcelona to take to New York City or from San Francisco to take to Brasilia. That's a mechanical worldview. We want to know this place on its own terms. And what I like to say is that when we do that, we help people fall in love with life again. And even in the process, they're actually falling in love, or at least falling in light with each other, because they're working on being in relationship to work on a common aspiration. It's actually not that hard. If you can actually, what's hard is to stop solving problems. But if we can actually work on what it means to support this living organism, that allows people to work, allows a common aspiration and a common purpose to be expressed. We see this kind of transformation happening within 2 weeks in our communities. And now I want to speak about, where people who are at war with each other, or at war with a developer, or at war with the government, saying, all right, there is a way to work together. Let's start figuring it out. Now, it takes some time after that, like about a year of practice to do that, because you don't just do this because you have a change management weekend. There's no such thing as the kind of immediate, you may be immediately inspired, but we go right back to business as usual without a practice. So with this idea of a practice, and I'll finish this up now, I know this is a long answer, but with the idea of a practice, what happens is you build a field of common, I'll say it again, common purpose, and it's an attractor. If people can actually work together effectively, that's a very important metric. Effectively, over a consistent period of time, people start saying, wow, this is different than government. This is different than just talking in the coffee shop or around the pub complaining. We're actually getting something done. And it attracts other people. And what we've seen is within a year, you start attracting massive change. So by actually taking the time to aim properly, engaging people in a practice, massive change is possible. It's what gives me hope. Okay, I'm done with that answer. Thanks for letting me go on.
Yeah, thanks. It's very interesting. Again, we're focusing on really deep connection with the place. And I had a question here about the saying that you put in one of your posts, Daniel, that I really liked. I was sharing it with friends. It's actually by Jalaluddin Rumi, who's a Persian poet. So that's my origin. He says, out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. So this idea that this is not about right and wrong, it's just about this connecting with this field of ultimate possibilities, the just, you know, letting things emerge that have to emerge because we're just connecting. I mean, that's how I understand this. And I was wondering, in this world that's so polarized between right and left politics, or nationalism and federalism, you know, or, you know, top down, bottom up, you know. So in your view, from your approach, you know, to me, it looks like regenerative culture can heal all these things, because you don't have right and left. You don't have top, up and down. You know, we're just people. You know, you don't have this problem of Black Lives Matters. You know, if there just happens to be a person of color there, great, welcome. You know, join the party. I mean, I don't. It all seems a bit like, is this a hippie movement, or is this something real that we're doing? You know, are we, from your point of view?
Thank you. Well, I love that quote, and what it says to me is that whenever I catch myself framing something as this is this and therefore it's not that, I'm looking a little bit at how are the two related, and what would the both and space be like. I still feel uncomfortable when we talk down sustainability or talk down circular economy or all those, that they're human beings with a deep intention to serve in all of these fields. And I think you can work on circular economy regeneratively. You can work on architecture regeneratively. You can work on product design regeneratively. It's because it is about a perspective. It's about a practice and a way of seeing the world. And so for me, the whole notion that we, even to some extent, I feel, while Bill was absolutely right, and I also pointed it out, that the whole place-sourced approach takes us into specificity and into the uniqueness of each individual, each community, each project, and the phenomena. And there is something that we can not copy-paste, but that we can align with, which is more what Emmanuel was speaking to, that life has certain patterns by which it sustains life. And so to take approaches from one city to another, if you just copy paste it, then it's not regenerative. But if you look at what somebody did in a watershed that seems to have a very similar ecological and climate condition than your watershed, and you explore, would that be meaningful to us, and how would it be meaningful to us, and how would it fit into this place and this culture, how would we transform it and make it our own, then I think that is a legitimate conversation. And it doesn't necessarily help to block every conversation around those kind of influences. It actually serves. And similarly, when we talk about health, there are certain triggers in seeing health or resilience as something static that we try to bounce back to. But there's also a perspective on health and resilience that is deeply transformative and evolutionary. And that perspective is again based on understanding life's patterns. And I think that's where we can learn a lot when we live in community, in place, into the questions of how would we become expressions of this place again? How would we build companies not in isolation and competition against each other, but whole ecosystems of regenerative enterprises that serve the individual entity that is the enterprise by its role in the larger system that it tries to have a healing effect on. And part of that is also always letting go of what no longer serves. Like when we've understood that a product is harmful, let's not continue with it. When we understand that a pattern or a company has done its service, that was one of the big lessons I learned from this little book that Ethan Rowland and Gregory Landwehr wrote, Regenerative Enterprise, where they invite enterprises to design for their own death. That's truly deeply regenerative in the sense that life ultimately creates new possibilities for new things to emerge through collapse of old patterns that no longer serve. So death is part of generating plenty of life. And creating companies that just because Siemens has been around for 100 and some years, the assumption is will be around in 100 years. But maybe a lot of these large corporate entities that have driven globalization now need to ask themselves, what would we look like if we actually dissolved into a globally collaborative network of many small, even cooperatively community-owned companies in bioregions having a regenerative impact on regions. And this is a redesign of the entire human impact on Earth. It's redesigning our systems of production and consumption much more with the focus on local ecosystems and bioregions. And if we do that, we generate not just a healthier relationship with more than human life and the rest of nature, we actually generate more employment, we generate more meaning, we generate a different way of working. And for me, that's the promise of co-creating very diverse regenerative cultures everywhere.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. I think that point you make about, I think there's definitely a tendency for corporations to break up. I mean, we see that Amazon and many Chinese companies have gone down this route of breaking themselves up into these network pieces, and it's working very well. The problem is then that a lot of the wealth still goes to the same people at the top. So absolutely, I mean, if that can be done to make use of these network platforms that we can now have, but also to distribute wealth much better in the organization, which is, again, part of this regenerative culture. So I think this is makes a lot of sense in terms of going towards a distributive and distributed economy. And just in terms of what also Emmanuel said about health and what Liliana's doing, I don't know which one of you wants to answer this, because it's this question around, I like the idea of that health is the new wealth, and this idea that we have health at different systems. Obviously, if you don't have ecosystem health, you can't have human health, you can't have animal health, you can't have biohealth, So if you don't have, if we are suffering, if we are stressed and we're unwell in ourselves, then our bodies begin to deteriorate. What we eat, how we eat, our behavior. So all this idea of connecting with health at different levels is, I think, very much fundamental to understanding this regenerative culture. So how do you see that how do we change our relationship with health? Instead of dealing with symptoms, to look at the causes, which is the basics of traditional medicine and all these philosophical-based medicines for centuries, that have been going around.
I can go on that. I think, at least from my opinion. I think everything, once again, we pointed out, it's interconnected. And so I cannot talk about a healthy ecosystem if I don't talk about individuals that are healthy. Not healthy only in the physical matter, but health is conceived as body, mind, and spirit. And again, this notion of being in connection also with our life force, which is part of the whole, and having this sense of really looking at health not from only the point of view we go to the doctor and we fix diseases, but we look at ourselves as a whole ecosystem by itself, because we are part of it. And once we are in a good balance between our mind, our body, and our spirit, we are much more in alignment, and we are much more able to thrive ourselves, to also connect with an healthy ecosystem and enable the existence of healthy ecosystems. So because we are interconnected, and I think that's the major gap. And when we are talking here about sustainability, circular economy, and all of these concepts, again, they are always, I think the big, for me at least, when I look at the concept of regeneration, and we talk a little, you pointed out, Daniel, Bill, and Emmanuel pointed out that we are getting the risk that becomes a big buzzword as sustainability was. But at least for me, regeneration has this plus that actually go to the essence of the issue, which is we have to look at ourselves. I cannot conceive a project that is talking about, for example, a building that is really ecological, bioclimatic, the materials, all of it, if the people that live there, the people that design it, are not in alignment with themselves. And I think that's the biggest point that you have to really point it out, is how we first, so again, it's not about the individual and the collective as separate. The individual and the collective are together, and they live like in this flow of really balance it out. So the individual, first and foremost, as a cell of part of the ecosystem, by itself has to be balanced, has to be connected, has to feel whole, so it can feel healthy in the higher sense of health, so it can promote and be a driver of the ecosystem self. And this is all about the balance. I can point it out one thing. For example, for me, it's very pragmatic of what I want to say. If majority of humanity is wounded, it is root. There's a big, and I'm going to point it out, there's a big wound. We are not healed on ourselves. There's a big wound of lack of self-love. And majority of problems on earth are related with lack of self-love. So we can, of course, we can point to technology, and I'm an engineer. That's why I wanted to tell my story. I came with all the engineer, the technology part, but that's why I wanted to do the self-discovery, because things have to be connected. The real humanity, it's not about only the technology and the techniques and all of that. We can, that's easy. The hardest part, it's us to, again, self-discovery. And I think, and the root and the thing of us connecting and understand that when, for example, we really go to our own wounds, where we really go to our deepest self and love ourselves. For example, I feel whole. I don't have the need to consume so many things, because majority of people are consuming things because they just want to external validation. So again, I want to point it out, the connection between the damage that we are doing in the ecosystems is related with our own damage. And I think it's an important thing for us to really work on, is really, if there was I think it was Gandhi that said that if you really want to change the world, you start by changing by itself. And I think people really don't connect so much what this really means, because when you really do the work and you become a more whole person, and I'm not meaning to become a monk, that's not the point. I think there's another, it's really when you feel that you are connected and you belong to a higher power of the universe, and everyone is connected. I feel first and foremost, I feel the need to protect nature, because I'm part of it. So I know that I'm protecting myself. And I will not do, and will not feel the need to do things that are, in fact, indirectly doing harm on the planet. So I think it's very important. It's more than health by itself. It's a sense of wholeness in ourselves that has to be promoted. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liliana, for just. So you want to say something? I just. I think that's brings us this. Where we are right now is, in fact, on a lighter note, I was thinking with Human Nation, because we're developing a feel and think tank, because we have a lot of think tanks and we don't have enough field tanks, no? And this is the idea of a lot of what you're talking about is, it looks like we've neglected a big part of ourselves, in terms of, we only give credit to the mind, or the masculine, feminine, energy, the top 5 billionaires that are now influencing policy through the World Health Organization, or the Food and Agriculture Organization now, where, and democracies are being influenced by this. So all this is now men as well, it's a lot of imbalance in the whole system. A lot of times in this world, we also talk about moving from ego to echo, so again, too much influence on me and not enough on the whole. So it looks like, it's not like we're doing everything wrong, in my view, is that we're just not balanced, as you were saying. So the question I have is, actually this relates to how we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them, which is a quote by Albert Einstein that we like to use. So this is a question, I think, also related to what you posted, Emmanuel, when you said, you can never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And this is a quote by Buckminster Fuller. So my question on that is, when we see, based on what's been talked about today, everything is going in a different directions. We have SDG goals that are goals, but we're not changing the system. We're just putting goals, but from the same system. And we also have these decarbonization targets for 2030. We have circular economy. And tomorrow, what happens if they take the concept of regenerative and it just becomes a label, and it's no longer really, we're going to carry on doing the work, but everything just loses meaning if we don't change really the way we do things. So if you could tell us a little bit about how you see the relationship between this work we're trying to do and meeting the SDGs and the decarbonization targets.
Well, Sharam, I think all these programs, SDGs, ESG, decarbonization, or this green just and digital program in Europe, they are like tools. So they have their value, but they only have value in the way that they are used from a specific mindset. So when the purpose is clear, what we want to do, they can support that purpose. One example, one of the sustainable development goals, number 8 actually, is sustainable economic growth. And there is talk nowadays, post-pandemia, about growing GDP again, gross national product, start to grow it again. Well, if that is what we're trying to do, then we're not working from the right mindset. It's not about getting bigger. It's not about being busier. It's not about more stuff. And so we can use these tools in the right way, or we can use them in the wrong way. And so we have to see them as that, as tools and programs that can serve, but we should be working on a higher level. And Liliana talked about, building a home which has all these green features and technology. It's the same. What is it useful for? For instance, if you make a happy home where people feel well, they may not need to go on a holiday in a faraway place to go and rest. So you don't need that anymore. Or if you start producing food again and you start reconnecting with creating food, maybe you can start eating healthier. Maybe you don't have to buy as much. Maybe instead of an energy bill, you will start having a solar income. And so if the purpose then is to make affordable homes so people feel better, then all this technology and these tools and these certifications always are useful. But then I think my main message is, what is the purpose of the tools, the programs, and reflect on that, and then use them as a support, but not the other way around.
Fantastic. Thank you, Manuel. So just to wrap up, I think, Alice, I'm very happy that I think you confirmed my initial idea. I wanted to say this talk for me is about regenerative culture, is about the how we're going to get there. And SDGs, circular economy, and all these are methods and tools, or the targets. But so far, we didn't have the answer of how we're going to get there. And for me, regenerative culture and this transformation is the how. So I'm very happy I feel much more confident that this is now the way forward. And just last thing to wrap up, we want to see if there's a practical example now. So I think we're going to take a potluck to see if there's somebody in this room that has a project that's very local, because that's what we want, and is linking regenerative housing and work environment and biodiversity somewhere nearby in Madrid. Okay, Miguel is here. Miguel Rico? Yes, please. If you can go here.
Thank you. Hello, good to meet you.
Miguel, please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I'll describe briefly the project we are doing here. I am the developer, and I am working with SAT and Distrito Natural with Iñaki. And I think this is an awesome opportunity to have all this applied here. We are talking of the place is 80 kilometers from Madrid, is in Avila, next to Madrid. And I think the setting is a great opportunity, and we are inviting you all to participate because this is and I'll be very brief in describing, but basically it is a 5-hectare project which includes 60 houses, a wellness center, a social center, a center for biodiversity, and some farming land. So the land is in a small village, Higuera de las Dueñas, 280 people. We are in the village, behind the village, just behind the church, so that we can be blessed. And looking at south, we have a public, the ESA and forest. The ESA is a very peculiar Spanish ecosystem, which is open forest, where we have, so we are talking of 1,200 hectares. This is managed by the town hall of the village. So we have the village right here in the back. We have a little creek, and then all this mountain and all this opportunity to develop all kinds of issues about rewilding, restoring wildlife, all kinds of. So this is a wonderful setting to be able to do this. So I just to understand this, Spain has a very peculiar problem. We have been depopulating small villages. The concentration in cities is 80% of population. The villages, so this is a big problem in Spain, where villages are being abandoned. So we have a great opportunity to inspire people of what we can do into the rural areas. So I wanted to share this with you. And so the setting is this wonderful public land from the townhouses. The second issue is the village we are with a traditional village. This is a village. We have the church behind and the bull ring, La Plaza de Toros, on the other side. And then we have a traditional village with cattlers. But cattlers are very important because we have small cattlers have 90% disappear. So this is a very interesting setting. And the dehesa is a very, very rich and wonderful ecosystem. So besides this, well, we have a community. We have the design. The design, of course, is being done by Distrito SAT. And the name we call to this is biophilia, biophilic design. So, of course, we have all the issues about construction, zero carbon emissions, water, energy, but we are also designing for wildlife. So we have the design and we have the community. So when we talk about biophilia, we talk about love of nature and the opportunity to recreate love of nature, but also the community to give support and care, with people, with others, and basically, and then the village, So basically, I think this is basically what I wanted to say. I think this the description of the project, and you are all invited to, and I'm very excited. We are all very excited about having this wonderful opportunity and unique opportunity to be able to share it with others, with other villages and so on. So thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you again. Sí, te puedes quedar. So I think on that note is just to say that the thing that comes to my mind is that the best way to create the future we want is to create it, and that's why we're here. I think that for me, just personally, to say that I'm feeling very glad to be here in Triple, in this community, because I've been looking for a place in Spain where I fit and where I feel like I'm at home with people who are trying to create this future. I'm really honored and grateful to be here and have the opportunity to be with all the great practitioners, and I think we can do great things together. So as you all said, doing it in community is fundamental, coming together, and that's what we're doing here. I'm just wondering if there's any questions from the chat that you wanted to share, or if anybody from the audience wants to ask a question, and then we'll be wrapping up. Afterwards, we have the chance to have a vermouth downstairs, which is very much a Madrid thing to do. And if you're at home, please take something you can celebrate with from the out of the fridge and celebrate with us, for a regenerative drink. So is there any questions we can ask, or there's no? Would anybody like to ask anything? Yes, please. Bill?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. I just want to do, and I think sounds like a wonderful project. I'd like to live there myself, Miguel. The question that I ask ourselves, which I think is the ultimate test for regeneration, is to compare the terminology between generative and regenerative. What we're all doing these days, I hope, is generating new relationships and new ways of being with each other. The question is, when I leave as a consultant to a community, does the community have the capability to regenerate and co-evolve with that system? And if they don't, I've not created a regenerative project. So it's just a general test for all of us, I think, that I throw out. So thank you.
I want to follow on that, because I had a quick conversation with Miguel about this project, and one of the questions I asked him is the engagement of the future habitants in the future community. Because if you, it's wonderful to have all these elements, and it sounds like a delightful place, but it's an additive whole. If you just put element, and we also have a saltwater swimming pool, and we have a little greenhouse where we grow hydroponic eco vegetables, and wonderful, let's have them if the people really want to have them and if they decided that they want to have them. But the top-down development process, I don't think has a future if we want to really create regenerative communities. We have to get into the messiness of developing the places, not just with the future inhabitants of the places you're selling as the developer, but with the village. What does the village think? And how do we know about the story of that place through engaging the old people and their dreams and their history, and listening to the local forester and the local shepherd about how this place has changed. And that will then inform and probably bring all the same elements onto the map, but in a way that people have ownership and want to participate in it. So danger of top-down development process.
Clear of that, yes.
Okay, so there's no questions on the chat. And I was just thinking, with everything you said, I hope that they say this COVID brought us this great pause to think and reflect, and everybody got into mindfulness and yoga and looking after themselves. And then they say when like we get back to normal, people will just forget, you know. And I hope it doesn't take another pandemic to get us to do what you just said, which is to really want to make this change. Because I agree with everything that you said, that you have to really come from the inside. And I don't know how much pain it takes to make the shift. I know I suffered from a lot of similar experiences of seeing how things are done, a lot of pain, a lot of stress, to really make these changes in my life, because, you know, it really creates a lot of suffering and torment in the mind, to live in a world that's so disconnected, where you can't make sense of your surrounding, your place. What are you doing? What is the meaning? So I think purpose and this kind of dialogues is very fundamental. And I see that this is already happening, so it's very encouraging. So as people have done for thousands of years, we'll have a vermouth.
Just a question, could I comment something on what you said?
Just one comment on that. I want to say I have been for now 23 years trying to develop a community like this. I have lived in 7 countries. I have traveled in different places. Here is now. But what led me to this was pain. The pain of seeing a system that destroys the world, as we share. The pain of seeing that our way of consuming destroys. When we press the gas in the car, we are putting CO2 in the atmosphere. So this pain, and looking for how I could transform this pain into love, into action, is what led me, after 23 years, to create this thing now. So anyway, I think that pain and love is very next to each other. And I think that this pain is what makes us transform and do a different thing, okay.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you to everybody who made this happen. Tipre, Espacio Sano, where we are, the healthy space, and also Distrito Natural, and all the people that supported the project. And thank you for the invitation. And thank you so much for bringing so much wisdom back to this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, everybody.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.